I am so excited about the guest we have on our show today. Welcome back to the Liz Wheeler Show. Our guest today is a young woman by the name of Annabella Rockwell. Maybe you haven't heard of her. A lot of people haven't, but let me introduce you to her story. Annabella Rockwell was raised in a fairly typical conservative family. Her parents divorced when she was young, although they later got back together. Her family wasn't overtly political, but they were Christian. When she reached college age, she got into a very prestigious women's college named Mount Holyoke, which she wasn't aware of at the time, but is a very, very liberal institution. She gets to Mount Holyoke College, and right from the get-go, initiation into this college, she realizes that, recognizes now is probably a better way to phrase it. She didn't realize at the time that this institution, and this was back in 2011, so before the transgender ideology became as prevalent in our country as it did, that happened around 2015. She realized that this college is just a cesspool of leftism. There are transgender students on campus. There is this culture of feminism, this very against the patriarchy type of activism, very few conservative students. And throughout the course of her experience at this school, she starts to become very radical left. She starts to shed her conservative upbringing, shed her Christian upbringing, and buys into this woke ideology to the point where it caused a breach in her family. She stopped talking to her mom. Her parents said that she became unrecognizable to them. It's what I'm describing might sound familiar to you because this is every family's nightmare. A lot of us have experienced situations like this where we have a family member, especially a young family member who maybe goes off to college, maybe they're on TikTok too much, and they change, they move away, they reject the values that they were brought up in, and they embrace, whether it's never Trumpism, whether it's queer theory, whether it's critical race theory, whether it's just wokeism in general, whether they think Kamala Harris is great, whatever it might be, radical abortion rhetoric. They shed their values and embrace Neo-Marxist ideology that's just the antithesis of what we are as America. So Annabella Rockwell's story, in a sense, is very common. It's also very unique because her family, her mother specifically, didn't give her up to this ideology. Her mother called lots of people on the phone to ask advice about how to extract her daughter from this woke cult. Now, this is actually how I first heard about Annabella's story, is because you and I, for the last month and a half, 2 months, have been talking about how wokeism being basically a euphemism for Marxism, how wokeism is structured like a cult. We call it the woke cult because it's actually structured like a religious cult where there's different levels. You have the lowest level of cult members in the woke cult who are just, they're sort of the victims of the cult, honestly. They might be the loudest and the most annoying. They're parroting all of the phrases, the narratives of the cult, but they don't really know the ideology behind it. So they might have, they, them pronouns on their Twitter bio, and we might mock that, and rightfully so. But they don't really realize that what they're propagating is neo-Marxist ideology. That's the bottom level of the cult. And then you have the mid-level of the cult, the sort of the intellectual class, the academic class. This is like the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, or Robin DiAngelo, or Ibram X. Kendi. These people propagating neo-Marxist ideology with full knowledge that what they're propagating is Marxism. But they're not actually the leaders of the cult either. The actual leaders of the cult are the people who may not be committed Marxists, actually. They are just aware that propagating Marxism in our country is going to get them financial and ideological control over us, over people, and so they use Marxism as a weapon against us. It's like an actual religious cult where the leaders know that they're not really God. They know they don't have special powers, but everyone else, they've brainwashed everybody else into believing that they are God and they do have special powers. So Annabella Rockwell's mom understood, she recognized that her child was just unrecognizable, and she called up a cult deprogrammer. That's right, she called an actual cult deprogrammer to get advice on how to, deprogram her daughter from the radical feminist, anti-man, sometimes anti-American cult that had consumed her daughter to the point where Annabella wouldn't even talk to her mom. So her story is absolutely fascinating, so let's get to it. I use 4Patriots, and I know you'll understand how important it is to use them as well, because China already screwed us over once with COVID, right? I don't want that to happen again. The Chinese Communist Party right now is doing something that we should all be aware of. They are hoarding massive amounts of food. Over 2/3 of the globe's corn reserves, actually over half of its rice and over half of its wheat. And when they're asked about it, the Chinese Communist Party just lies. The question you and I should be asking is, why is China hoarding food? The answer is because China thinks we're on the verge of a global food shortage, and China's the world's #1 food importer. They rely on the rest of the world to keep their people fed, so they can't afford to mess up, or they're going to face riots or civil panic, maybe even worse, when their people, over 1 billion people, can't eat. So what does this mean for you and for me? 2 words: food shortages. We are going to face them here. That's why I highly recommend you stock up on 4 Patriots survival food. The kits where the food is stored are compact, they stack easily, they have different breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and I got you a great deal. Right now, you can get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriots survival food if you use my promo code Liz at checkout. Just go to 4patriots.com, use promo code Liz to get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriots survival food. That's 4patriots.com, promo code Liz. I am so excited about our guest today. She has a fascinating story, and I'm delighted that she agreed to sit down and talk to us about this story. Now she works as the development director for Palm Beach, Florida for PragerU, but previously she was a radical leftist who was indoctrinated in college into all kinds of crazy things, and her family took extreme measures to extract her from this ideology. She's going to sit down and talk to us all about her story. Annabella Rockwell, thank you for joining me. I have so many questions for you. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Hi, Liz. Thank you so much for having me, and ask away.
Okay, so some people may not be familiar with your story. I know they're going to be so interested in hearing about this, especially given what we've been talking about on this show for the past month now. But first, I want to ask you just a basic question. If you don't mind my asking, how old are you?
Yeah, I'm 30 years old.
And I know, my audience is thinking, Liz, that's a rude question to ask a lady, but it's pertinent to this story, I promise. So the background of your story is when you were a child and a teenager growing up, was your family political at all?
I think that we lived in a fairly normal, I'd say moderately conservative household. More than political, we loved America. I'm descended from someone that came over on the Mayflower, so I always had pride of country. I'm really well traveled. My mom took me all over the world, so I always had an appreciation for America. And we weren't so political. We talked a bit about the presidents and things, but we were not necessarily very far one way or the other.
Okay, but it's safe for me to characterize it as you weren't raised in a household that was traditionally Democrat or hardcore liberal or anything like that.
Correct.
Okay, so then you go to college and you chose Mount Holyoke to go to college. What made you choose this college? It is a pretty liberal college. It's known for that.
It's also a really good school. It's incredibly academic. It's the first of the 7 sisters. I got in and it was one of those kind of no-brainers. Like, this is such a good school. I have to go. They gave me a great financial aid package. I was recruited to play on the tennis team. I loved that it was a part of the other 5 colleges. So Amherst, UMass, Hampshire, Smith. It was kind of an amazing quintessential New England college campus and experience. So I was very excited about going there. And I didn't really know that it was so liberal, if you will. I just thought liberal arts meant I could explore a lot of different topics.
So when you got there, what was your first clue, or what was the eye-opening experience when you realized, oh, wow, okay, the culture here is a little bit different than I thought?
So it started pretty quickly during orientation. Mount Holyoke is it's a women's college, but pretty quickly I was told that I can't assume someone's gender. We were given this little paper in all of our mailboxes that said, he may be she may be he, they could be them. Don't assume anything. Sexuality is a spectrum, gender is a spectrum. A lot of the student body and also a lot of the professors and the faculty were very androgynous. So I was kind of thrust into this environment of, gender is very fluid, and I had never heard that concept before. So that was kind of the first, whoa, what even is that? And I kind of thought it was funny, but I also didn't judge. I was like, all right, whatever. I guess this is how college works.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, is if you weren't raised in, a leftist environment and you get to college and you hear about this idea that gender is a spectrum and a girl can be a boy if they identify as a boy, and these neo-pronouns. I mean, did that seem weird to you at first, or was it just so normalized on campus? How did you handle that?
It was so normalized on campus that there wasn't really a grace period for you to question it. It was kind of immediately like you're meeting students who are transgender, you have classmates that are women, but they totally present as boys. And I entered school the fall of 2011. So that's years before any of this was really in the mainstream media. So I had no idea about any of this. Honestly, it was kind of fascinating. It was very like, oh, liberal arts, people are exploring themselves. And I was coming from a place of, I grew up going to church, like love your neighbor, respect people, be kind, be open-minded, maybe I wasn't questioning my gender, but I certainly wasn't going to judge you. And I didn't really understand how heavy of a self-identity crisis it truly is. I was just like, okay, this is how people do things here.
Which perhaps is what they were hoping that you would do. The thing about your story that got me, one of the stories that you've told before, is that they have like a ritual for girls who, freshmen who are incoming into this school, where they try to bring you into this, I like the word you use, this androgynous type of behavior, and they actually encourage you to cut your hair.
Yeah, so we had this little ritual called the moho chop, where in your first semester of your first year, also, we were not freshmen, we were first years. That was drilled into us during orientation as well. They had the moho chop, where you would kind of ceremoniously like cut off all your hair. And a bunch of the students did it. And, power to them. I did not do it. I'm very grateful that I didn't. I certainly thought about it, but I still was kind of like, that's a little too far. But I think it was this idea of shedding who you were prior to walking on campus. And also it's this, stand up against the patriarchy. Again, another word I had ever heard until coming to school. I didn't understand that we were, this patriarchal society. I didn't know what that was. My mom, for the most part, my parents are actually divorced. My dad's they're back together. But for a lot of my life, my mom was a single mom, and I went to girls' schools growing up. So I always had leaders in my classes that were girls. So it never even occurred to me that we could be in this like evil man ruling society. But it was made pretty clear to me, like right as I stepped on campus.
We're going to break that down in just a second. But first, I want to talk to you about Genucel. Ladies and gentlemen, there are a lot of skincare products out there, but let me cut right to the chase and tell you about the one I like the best. It's called Genucel. Sure, you can go to Brazil or Colombia. You can get crazy stuff done to your face, but why on earth would you do that when you have Genucel? Let me read you what a woman named Claire said to me. She said, I absolutely love Genucel. My skin feels so good, tighter, younger, with a more even tone, and I only used it for a week. My advice for everyone, take a before picture. It's true. Genucel is a family recipe made by a compounding pharmacist in small batches. It's always safe, cruelty-free, and natural. Right now, go to Genucel.com/Liz, and you can save over 70% off Genucel's most popular package, which features their ultra retinol and dark spot corrector. Don't wait. Go to Genucel.com/Liz. All orders are upgraded to free shipping, and every subscription order includes a complimentary spring spa box with 3 spa essentials, also free. It is for a limited time, though, so visit now, Genucel.com/Liz. That's GENUCEL.com/Liz. Genucel.com/Liz. Okay, I'm sorry, I can't get past the haircut thing. So do you mean this, like, did they, like, shave their heads? Are you talking about cutting in, like, a Randy Weingarten sort of, like, choppy style? Like, what do you mean? What is this?
I mean, from like long hair to no hair, or just shave half of it, which was, kind of cool, kind of a look at the time.
You're much nicer than I am, because that sounds objectively hideous to me. Honestly, whether you're a boy or a girl, but especially for a girl. So one of the phrases you just said, I think is really interesting. You said they want you to shed your previous identity when you walk onto campus, which to me is the first red flag. Like, oh wow, okay, that's an indoctrination center, right? They're wanting to fundamentally transform how you think, not just educate you, not just open your mind to a liberal arts education. When did it become clear to you that your views were actually changing, that these words like patriarchy and the ideology behind it was something that you were like, actually, no, that makes sense. I want to take part in this?
So my sophomore year was the Romney-Obama election. And I remember I actually voted for Mitt Romney, and everyone on campus voted for Obama. And it was made clear to me, I think really then, that like Republicans are bad. People really, really hated Mitt Romney, the whole idea about him, the fact that he was Mormon, the fact that he had a career, just every single thing about him was demonized on campus. And I think that's when I first realized, like, wow, this is an opinion I have that's people are really disagreeing with me, but it wasn't grounded in that much conviction, where by the time I was a junior at Mount Holyoke, that's when I really started to shift. So I started taking classes. I started taking a gender studies course. I'd been very involved in the student body at this point. I had a lot of friends. I was really sympathetic. Knew a lot of people that were transgender. Like I said, when I walked on campus, there were a lot of girls that identified as boys. And so I kind of was conditioned to really accept that as a fact, not even question, like, is that really true? Like, well, what about science? What about biology? No, I was told that like it's a spectrum, and my professors all had Ivy League degrees. What am I going to do? Question them? Like, I'm the 18, 19-year-old. Like, I came here to learn from you. I did not come here to teach you what's right. So I was just a sponge. And it was my junior year that really I just started to shift. And it was most noticeable when I would start to come home on vacations. I would start to feel like as a woman, I didn't realize that I had been really oppressed, that, the cards were stacked against me. And I would come home to my family and I would say, well, Mom, Nani, that's my grandmother, like, women in the 50s, they were all addicted to drugs and miserable and hated their lives being housewives. And my family would look at me like, what are you talking about? And I'd say women couldn't have credit cards until the 70s, like all these things and my mom was like, I had a credit card. What are you talking about? Like these things that didn't make sense. But I was so programmed to believe this. And I think that my family at that point started to say that I was unrecognizable because I just was so rooted in these ideas of feminism and like really extreme leftism. So that's the time. It was my third year that I was there.
And I think in a sense, this is one of parents' nightmares, to see, their innocent child corrupted with this ideology. And we're going to get to the part that's unique really about your story. A lot of young people are indoctrinated in college like you were, but the unique part of your story is that your parents hired a cult deprogrammer to rescue you. And I want to get into that in a second. But I first do want to establish from your point of view what the indoctrination tactics that were used against you were the effective ones. So is it just being in a campus that widely accepts, basically neo-Marxist ideology, like the transgender ideology? Is it the fact that you were afraid to question your professors? Was it the fact that there weren't different viewpoints? What was it, do you think, that was effective in the indoctrination process?
That's a really good question. And I think there are a few things. One, I think when you're completely removed from your environment that you grew up in and you're thrust into this new campus, right? Everything is new and your eyes are so open and you're so susceptible because every single experience is a new experience. You're in a new environment. You're impressionable. You're also young. I think really it's classic Marxism. If you're told a lie enough, it becomes a truth. And that's just that. If I'm told that this girl is a boy enough times, okay, I believe it. This girl is a boy, like, sure. And then I start repeating it. And then when people don't believe me, I'm like, well, you don't know anything because I go to Mount Holyoke and you just don't understand because you're not college educated or like you didn't go to my school. So it's just simple. You're told a lie enough, you believe it. You're told it from a person in a position of authority, you're going to believe it. And also the conservative girls on campus, there weren't many, but there were a few. One, actually Laura Loomer, who ran for Congress, she transferred after only a year because she was bullied so badly online and had, no friends. People were so mean to her. She was very strong in her convictions. And if you were conservative, there was no room for your opinion. And for me, like being young, being involved in things in clubs and sports, wanting to have friends, like it almost was like, it's the easier, softer way is to just sort of follow the lie until you believe it.
Which I think this is so interesting because it's not like we picture, Chinese communist indoctrination camps or, the Soviet education system after the Russian Revolution, which were like violent and, terrible and brutal. This is literally peer pressure, isolation from your family, and no dissenting viewpoints. And sometimes that's all it takes.
That's absolutely all that it took.
Which is fascinating. So your parents said that you became unrecognizable. This must have been really difficult for your parents. When did they realize that this wasn't just a phase where it was like, oh, okay, she's being rebellious, she's trying to stake out her own opinions, and she's parenting a little bit of silliness from college? When did they realize that this was like a little more deeply ingrained?
I don't think that it took very long. I'd say it was my, first vacation back my junior year, that Thanksgiving, where I started to sort of say things that didn't make sense to them. Really, by the time I was a senior is when I was actually fighting with my family to the point that we weren't speaking for periods of time. So, that's a pretty short time frame, less than a year.
Yeah, that is less than a year. Okay, so then we get to, and on this show, the last month, we've been talking about how wokeism, which is just a euphemism for Marxism, but how wokeism is structured like a cult. It's structured exactly like a religious cult would be, where, the people that are sometimes the loudest and the most annoying, repeating the talking points, whether it's neo-pronouns or critical race theory, they're just the water carriers. They don't really know the ideology. Then you have the intellectual class, like the Ibram X. Kendi, who totally know that they are preaching Marxism, even if they don't admit it, or like the Black Lives Matter leaders that do admit they're Marxists. Then you have these leaders of the cult who are maybe not tried and true Marxists, but they know that Marxism was a way for them to profit both financially and ideologically. We've been talking about this cult structure. It's so easy to understand wokeism and how to fight back against it when you identify it and define it as a cult. So your parents were ahead of the curve. I mean, we're talking about this now. This was years ago that your parents were like, wait a second, this is cult-like behavior. So back up and tell me about this process. How does this even work? How does one find a cult deprogrammer? Who was this person?
My mom's very creative and resourceful. I will give her that. I'm also the only child. So as soon as I kind of went off the deep end, like my family was going to do anything to help me and get me back. She had even called rehabs, I think, and was like, I need to get my daughter out of this environment. And it totally is comparable to a cult. So she did a lot of research, spoke to a lot of people. She did speak to cult deprogrammers. And I think that she knew the signs because my mom's from New York City originally. And I guess maybe like being in the city in the 70s, whatever, I think it was in the news then, like people talked about cults. She said EPS was one of them. I'm not totally familiar with cult history, even though I probably should be at this point, having kind of been in one. She sort of knew the signs. So she was not going to stop at anything. And she called a lot of people. And truthfully, Liz, she did not get positive feedback. Most of the feedback was that people don't come out of it. The small sliver of hope was that girls tend to come out of cults more so than boys or young men. They also told her that the timeline is about 7 years from when brainwashing starts to be able to come out of it, which interestingly enough actually does fit into my timeline perfectly because I really didn't snap out of it until 2020. So we're talking about 2013 to 2020 that it was still like I was sort of fighting all of this. And she spoke with a lot of people. And another thing is that I never actually spoke to a cult deprogrammer. She's the one who did. And they gave her a lot of different mixed information. Some people said, don't communicate with me. Others said, yes, her to death. Fortunately, she didn't do that because I think that yesing someone when they're going through this is not the answer. We're seeing that now and people, medically castrating their children. That's affirming these ideas. That is not what you should be doing. Like you should try to be help. There was an underlying issue. I was searching for something. Ultimately, now I realize, okay, I was very spiritually devoid. I'd grown up Christian, going to church, and then I went to school and immediately there's no room for God. I was really into the party culture, so I drank a lot. So I had to make a lot of life changes. I stopped drinking. I started to believe in God again in order to kind of break free of the chains of these ideologies. But a parent that's like, oh yes, honey, you're right. The patriarchy is destroying America and this country is horrific. Like, I'm just going to tell you yes. And you should be a vegan because of the environment and the world's ending in 12 years. Like, yes, it doesn't help. It just perpetuates the problem and then you stay stuck in it. So fortunately, my mom put her foot down and it was a big risk because I didn't talk to her for a while.
And we're going to talk about that in 1 second. But first, I want to talk about Cozy Earth. I don't know about you, but going to bed at a decent hour, if I'm actually able to do that, doesn't always mean that I get enough sleep. Oftentimes I was too hot or I was too cold. I just was uncomfortable. I woke up a lot and in the morning I did not feel rested. But that all changed with my Cozy Earth bedding. Let me tell you, it is the softest, most luxurious and responsibly sourced bedding on the planet. I know I'm always raving about Cozy Earth bedding, but I am not alone here. There are over 5,000 5-star reviews on their website, like this one from Allison. She said, I love them. They're the softest, most comfortable sheets I've ever slept on. My friends, I have Cozy Earth sheets on my bed at my house right now, and the reason I tell you this is because I love them, and I know you will too. Cozy Earth bedding is made using only the finest bamboo, which makes it no wonder top designers choose Cozy Earth. Their bedding is naturally temperature regulating, so you will sleep comfortably all year round. I sure do. Whether it's their luxury sheets, their loungewear, their pajamas, or their plush bath towels, you will love shopping at Cozy Earth. And I got you a great deal. You can save 35% right now on Cozy Earth. Just go to cozyearth.com/Liz35 and be sure to enter my promo code Liz35 at checkout in order to save 35%. That's cozyearth.com/Liz35, promo code Liz35 at checkout. Well, I mean, I think the word you used before, she sounds like an incredibly resourceful woman, but also a very loving mother. This is the definition of sacrificial love. So what was this strategy that she used? I mean, you said she talked to a lot of people, including some cult deprogrammers who were not encouraging, some who had good advice and said be based in reality. How did she interact with you? How did she start, I guess, reaching you psychologically and mentally to be like, hey, there's a problem here? Even if it took a long time for you to completely be extracted from that ideology, what did she do?
I'm so glad you asked that question. It's a really good one. So she actually used the tactics of having people I knew from growing up reach out to me. It happened to be a lot of coaches I had. So I skated growing up. I also played tennis. She had my high school tennis coach reach out to me just to check in, just to say, hey, how are you doing? Thinking of you, praying for you, hope all is well. Little ties to who I was growing up. You know, I had a godparent that was reaching out to me, that was kind of available if I needed someone, because I had really disconnected myself, not just from my family, but also sort of my friends who I had from high school. You know, I was really going through this change of being so involved in wokeism and leftism that I was offended by everything. I felt like nobody understood how severe things really were in this world, and that anyone that, you know, didn't go to kind of a small liberal arts college just couldn't possibly understand like the weight of the world and what we're dealing with as a society. So it's like I almost was sort of taught to not even bother keeping up certain friendships like outside of my college friends, because a lot of them really got it, right? Because they were in the same environment. So that was, you know, just kind of ties to other lifelines, coaches, distant family friends. You know, my mom, God bless her, she was frustrated. So there would be times when she would try to reach out and it just wouldn't go well. So I think she realized, okay, I can't necessarily be the one. I sort of have to wait for her to come back to me. But here I'm going to be able to have lifelines and keep tabs with extended family.
Which is really interesting, because I know that, I mean, a lot of people, almost everybody, I think, has a family member that is straight in some way. Doesn't matter what area, whether it's, you know, religiously, whether it's morally, whether it's politically, and the depth also varies. But people are at a loss oftentimes to know how to do that. Were these people that were tied to you in your old life or your childhood and your high school years, were they generally conservative?
I think I don't want to say politically conservative. I would say more they were people of faith.
Right. It is one of the classic cult things, right? To separate someone from their family. This is, I mean, it's both what pedophiles do, trying to separate children from their entire support system, but it's also what cults do, saying, hey, I mean, think about Scientology, for example. Scientology, the first thing they say is, if anyone dissents in your family from what you believe and how you practice this cult, then you should kick them out of your life. That's a classic cult. So these family members started reaching out to you, and how did that touch you? Did that touch your heart? Did that touch your mind? How did you react to that?
I think I was cautious. I think it was like I slowly engaged. I maybe didn't divulge too much. I was wary about who I trusted. I actually wanted to just touch on what you just said. So we were told on campus, you know, go home for Thanksgiving and fight with your family at the Thanksgiving table, you know, like put your racist uncle in his place. Like we actually were told, and I think you see it all over social media. If you follow down kind of like leftist rabbit holes on Instagram, you'll find the posts that are saying like, it's your responsibility to teach your family about, you know, sexism and racism, and it's your responsibility to tell them they are wrong, and you create your own new family. You know, it's a very big part of the rhetoric, and it's really destructive, because true diversity is diversity of opinion. And even if you do disagree with a family member, you know, you should not be shutting them out over politics or ideology. It's like, it's really dangerous to our society right now. I think it's part of the reason that, the nuclear family is crumbling, because of these ideas.
It's part of the reason the left is attacking the nuclear family, because they know the nuclear family is this protection, this bulwark against ideology, just like wokeism. So if you were struggling with who to trust when these family and friends, these old coaches were reaching out to you, what did your mom do next? What happened next?
I think I ended up hitting a point where I was very sad. I was feeling very untethered to my family. Again, I'm an only child. I remember I went on a trip. I, went to Europe kind of looking to sort of find myself. I followed myself regardless. Doesn't matter where you go, your feelings go with you. And I realized how much I miss my family, and that I was willing to put aside like these differences. So I ended up calling her, crying, trying to work on the relationship. It was good for a minute, and then it got rocky again, because enter 2016. I go to work on the Hillary Clinton campaign while my mother is, making calls and bundling for Donald Trump. And so here we are again. I'm like, you don't understand what you're doing to women. Like, he's the Antichrist, and and all the ideas around that campaign. And so it really took, I would say, years of me being like, I want a relationship with her. She raised me. I know she's really good. And it's this inner crisis of like, well, if she was so good as a mom and she's so loving, how could she also be all these bad things that, my woke peers say about her? Like, there's no truth rooted in that. So I really, part of the awakening, as I say, was I did have a spiritual awakening, and I started to accept God again, and just this idea that like I'm not in control of everything. And I think in that I was just a little bit more receptive to receiving contact. And then, we didn't talk about kind of politics for a while. She also backed off the topic as well, and we just worked on, building our relationship back up from basics.
And this spiritual awakening, when I say where did that come from, I don't mean like, obviously it was the Holy Spirit. I mean, what prompted this? Was this from reading, from study, from someone in your life? What brought you back?
So I actually did a 12-step program to help stop drinking. And part of the steps are, give up control, believe in a higher power. It doesn't matter what the higher power is. For me, for a while, it was just kind of energy or things I couldn't see, or time. So that helped me in that process. And then I later on started to go back to church again and build an actual faith. But that was the first reintroduction.
That was the first step of it. Okay, so now we're getting to the point where it's like the beginning parts of the onion have been peeled back. You have a spiritual awakening, you've stopped drinking, you want a relationship with your mom, you're wondering how she can be both a bad person and such a good person to have raised you at the same time. When did you realize that, oh my goodness, these things that I learned, these radical feminism things, these Neo-Marxist transgender ideology things are actually wrong, that Donald Trump isn't the Antichrist, and that, oh, I can't believe I was on the Hillary Clinton campaign?
Oh, I can't believe it. 2020, which it took a long time. And, I started the process of going through this 12-step program in 2018. So it was about 2 years before, peeling back the layers of the onion, as you said, until I finally was like really clear-headed and open, and just really clear-headed and literally sober. And 2020, enter lockdowns, enter the BLM riots, my whole entire news feed and at this point I'm living in Florida. I had been living in New York City. So my whole news feed is people I went to college with, people I worked on campaigns with, putting up black squares saying no justice, no peace, riot is your First Amendment. And they're all posting this from their protected apartments in either Boston or New York. And I'm looking at this footage of people burning down businesses in the name of empowerment. And finally, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Like, how is this helping people? And actually, in that silo of Instagram, a PragerU video popped up. I mean, amazing. They broke the algorithm and they found me, and the video was, "Are the police racist?" And I remember watching this video, just sort of 20-second snippet, because it could have gone either way, right? It's just a question. It could go, they are, they aren't. I watch it, and this video in the first minute kind of discredits and dismantles this whole argument that, white cops are disproportionately shooting unarmed Black men. And I was like, okay, I need to relearn this and hear more about this, because what I'm seeing does not make sense. And so that's how it started.
Okay, well, no wonder PragerU hired you. You're like their happiest day ever. This is exactly why they do what they do and make this amazing content. And we'll have to ask them how they did break into your algorithm, because that's not easy to do these days. So then when you realize, okay, that's your awakening, when you're a little isolated from COVID, you see these riots, you see that, leftists are hypocrites about them, but you also see that the narrative that it's built on is like false and destructive and evil itself. Where did you then turn for truth?
A couple places. So definitely watched a lot of PragerU videos. Also, explored Tucker Carlson a little bit. Had never actually really seen his show. I thought he was a bad guy. I thought he was the enemy. I liked Rachel Maddow at the time. I also, I started to pick the brains of my coworkers. So I was working at JP Morgan, and also just sort of my peers in Florida, because it was living in Florida. I just really didn't open the conversation with like, oh yeah, I'm a crazy Democrat, because I kind of knew that this was Trump territory in 2020. I was like, I'm trying to not be so involved and so crazy about this. And I just started picking people's brains, and I realized that a lot of cool, young, hardworking, happy Americans, like, they're conservative. And so it's like, okay, there's something to this. Like, these are really smart people that I respect, and they think this way. So I'm going to keep asking them questions. Read some articles, love the Daily Wire, love Ben Shapiro. Definitely would never have explored his outlet had it not been for curiosity of the other side of the argument. And also just I really read things. I tried not to listen to too much. That was another key, because if you're reading it, you can kind of remove emotion a little bit when it's in your own voice. So I went to a lot of outlets, looked on Instagram, started listening to podcasts. Just, the Liz Wheeler show totally is on the list of shows to kind of hear the truth. So I did a deep dive. And what I love about the internet is that it is anonymous. So as I was, seeking truth, I didn't have to come out and say anything about it until I actually had convictions of what I believed and like what I knew was correct about this country. So I didn't have to tell all my friends who were, saying rah, rah, BLM. I didn't have to be like, I don't know if I agree with that. I just could sort of do my own research and then, approach it. But
so was your mom aware of this transformation as it was happening, or was this anonymous from her on the internet too, that you were just like, oh, Mom, by the way, one day I'm not radically left anymore. Now I agree with you.
I definitely had to eat a lot of humble pie and be like, okay, maybe you were right about certain things. And I definitely did come to her. And of course, as soon as I came to her, it was like the floodgates of all the articles just being sent to me. And she really loved President Trump's, like a lot of President Trump content. And I had to be like, I don't know if I'm totally there yet. I'm just trying to figure out the truth about like the buildings being burnt down right now in the name of George Floyd. Like, what is going on? That doesn't make sense. So I definitely did turn to her, but I think she was maybe not the first call that I made, just because I knew that I was going to have to hear a little bit of like, I told you so.
Well, I mean, you can't blame her for that. So let me ask you, your story is so fascinating. I'm so delighted that you've shared all these details, but what advice do you have? I mean, you're not the only young person that's been in this situation. You're not the only family who's had a family member go leftist, go into this woke cult. What would you first tell families or parents who have children that have been corrupted by woke ideology at the college level? And then what would you tell people like you who are in a similar circumstance where they got corrupted by the ideology in college and they feel trapped by it?
Mm-hmm. So firstly, I would tell parents who are going through this on the side of their kids going through, being the wokeism. What I would ask them is this an actual shift in your children? Because of course there are households that are progressive, that, there were students that I went to school with that they'd already, their parents were leftist. So this was not anything new for them. Who I'm trying to speak to is the person that has radically changed from who they are because they're in an environment that changed them, not for the good. So I would ask parents, do you recognize your child? And if the answer is no, you should not affirm these newfound identities, these newfound beliefs. I think you need to question the root of what's really going on. Of course, show compassion, but also stand in your convictions and don't let your child kind of teach you the way of the world, like maybe remind them a little bit of who's boss, and also explain like maybe they're in an echo chamber. Have they tried listening to anything else? Where are they getting their information from? So I would say like push back, definitely push back. Don't accept it if you do not recognize your child. I think it's really important to not accept it. And then for students who are going through this, I started with PragerU videos. I'd say it's a really good place to start. You can go to prageru.com and put in, any topic and you'll find something on it. And it's, we have PragerU personalities. There's Amla Epunobi, who also has a show. I'd say, check out the Liz Wheeler show. Just start looking at a feed that's a little bit different than everything that you're seeing. Like push yourself to read something else and pick a topic that maybe you're not as passionate about, something that won't get you so worked up emotionally. And also ask yourself realistically, like, are you reacting out of emotion? Are you reacting out of logic? Or are you reacting at all? Because I have the power now, Liz, where before, when I was brainwashed, I would read a title. It didn't matter, positive, negative, neutral, and I would immediately feel something. And now I read a title and I'm able to pause and think about it before, I have an opinion or even any sort of emotion. I can remove emotion from the situation, and wokeism totally preys on people's emotions. So I would say anyone that's going through this, like, you need to be really honest with yourself and take a look in the mirror. Like, is this affecting you? Are you anxious? Are you overwhelmed? Are you getting depressed? Like, we see that, throughout this country in young people, like the levels of depression have skyrocketed. And I do think that some of it is like they're clinging to this ideology that's actually really detrimental and it's really fatal. A lot of it, the mindset of it. So I would just start with looking in the mirror and asking yourself, like, is my reaction to this healthy? And you know what? Maybe even taking a social media cleanse, maybe deleting everything for 30 days, maybe not watching the news. The world will actually still continue. And then with a little distance, a little separation, then pick it up again and see if you can even handle it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very good advice. I always tell leftist, either high school students or college students, aren't you a tiny bit curious about what the other side says? Like when the left tells you that you're not allowed to listen to Tucker Carlson or you're not allowed to listen to my show, doesn't that make you just the tiniest bit curious about what we actually are saying, why they don't want you to hear it? And the other thing that I tell young people is try to find, if they're on the left, try to find one thing that you agree with about, even if it's not conservatives in general or the Republican Party, find one thing that you agree with these dreaded conservative personalities, because you'll realize the idea that half of the country who are Trump supporters or conservatives or Republicans walking around as absolutely 100% corrupted evil people is just an unrealistic proposition. And once you've allowed yourself to humanize people, which we should do on both sides, not just leftist children or young leftist people with Republicans, you'll be able to actually hear things a little bit better than through that filter. But this has been so interesting. Annabella Rockwell, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being so open. Welcome to the good side. We're glad to have you part of the conservative movement. And I love the fact that you are now working at PragerU. So anyone can follow Annabella on social media, on Instagram and on Twitter. Annabella, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Liz.
All right, guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show. If you haven't already, give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button below, and ring the bell to make sure you never miss a video.